Good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Albee, and I'd like to welcome you to the online service of Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, a loving, spirited, and ever more inclusive congregation. While our physical sanctuary can be found in Port Townsend, Washington, the sanctuary of our values and principles is found in the hearts and minds of curious and creative people located throughout the region, the country, and the world. We're so glad you are all with us today. I'd like to begin this service by acknowledging that the water, land, and shorelines here in Port Townsend are the traditional territory of the S'Klallam and Chemakum peoples. We honor and acknowledge our Indigenous members and neighbors, and vow to help restore and sustain their homelands. In a moment, we'll light the chalice. But first, let us settle our minds and calm our hearts with the ringing of our chime. Join us now for our opening song, Morning Has Broken, hymn number 38, led by Katy Taylor.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where his feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden's a play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Thank you, Katy and Sheila. It is now time for our chalice lighting ritual. Please join me and our guest speaker, Aimee Boulanger, in our chalice lighting words. They are from our sister congregation in Oberlin, Ohio. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also, to be welcoming to whomever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together. Our opening words are by Margaret Kipe. As surely as we belong to the universe, we belong together. We join here to transcend the isolated self, to reconnect, to know ourselves, to be at home, here on earth under the stars, linked with each other.
We'd like today also to welcome newcomers and acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting us. You're invited to say hello in the comments section and tell us your name and where you're from. We also hope you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour in our Fellowship Hall Zoom room. If you don't have that link, it will be posted in the chat section at the end of the service. And if you find this service useful or inspirational, and hopefully you find both, please share the link with your friends and family. So welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here with us today.
We will now receive the offering. Today, our collection will go towards IRMA, which stands for the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. The mission of this nonprofit is to protect people and the environment directly affected by mining. If you'd like to donate today, you have 3 options. Text the amount you'd like to give to the number now showing at the bottom of your screen. Or go to our website, quuuf.org, and click on the Giving link. Or simply mail a check to QUUF. Just remember to put the name IRMA, I-R-M-A, in the memo line. We will now gratefully receive your offering as we listen to George Stanley and Pat Rodgers singing Paradise on the topic of the impact of mining on the land.
Hi, this song is about paradise and the manifest destiny. When I was a boy, my family would travel down to western Kentucky, where my parents were born. There's a backwoods old town that's often remembered, so many times that my memories are worn. Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Sometimes we would travel right down that Green River to the abandoned old prison down by Avery Hill, where the air smelled like snakes and we shoot with our pistols, but empty pop bottles was all we would kill. Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Well, the coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and stripped all the land. And they dug for their coal till the land was forsaken, and wrote it all down as the progress of man. Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. When I die, let my ashes float down the green river. Let my soul roll along down to Rochester Dam. I'll be halfway to heaven with paradise waiting, just 5 miles away from wherever I am. Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away.
Thank you, George and Pat. Contrary to what was announced last week, we have reluctantly decided to postpone the grand reopening of QUUF. As you will recall, we had hoped to open September 12th, but that will not be happening. We sent an email announcement to everyone on our email list. If you did not receive that announcement, please contact the front office. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. And thus we place this first stone, thinking in particular of the citizens of Afghanistan who are struggling with an uncertain future. And now within the congregation, we light a candle of healing for Joanna England, who recently had a small but scary stroke that involved a 2-night stay at Jefferson Hospital. She is home now and longing for ice cream. Hint, hint. We light a candle of joy for Carl and Linda Bach, who celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary on Tuesday, August 17th. Happy anniversary, Linda and Carl. We hope you have many more happy years together. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I've just shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. I invite you now into a moment of silence.
The poet and farmer and writer Wendell Berry, in an interview given at Yale University, said this. He said, "Mountaintop removal is as near total destruction as you can imagine, because it does away with the forest, it does away with the topsoil that sustained the forest, it does away with the very topography even people's family graveyards go. And it's done in complete disregard not only of the land, but of the people who live downhill, whose lives are threatened, whose water supplies are destroyed, whose homes are damaged. The people downhill, downstream, and ahead of us in time are totally disregarded. We've got to keep our opposition to land abuse, and we've got to continue to communicate what that's all about and what it signifies. What it signifies is that some people are willing to go to the limit in earth destruction, to put it entirely at risk and destroy it entirely to preserve our way of life. A lot of people are willing to tolerate that. Our special music today is 16 Tons, performed by the Wild Rose Chorale, directed by Leslie Lewis.
Some people say a man is made out of mud, a poor man's made out of muscle and blood and skin and bones, a mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Do 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 do. I was born one morning when the sun didn't shine. Picked up my shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons of number 9 coal and the straw boss said,
"Oh, well, bless my soul."
Loaded 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Do 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 do. If you see me coming, better step aside. A lot of men didn't, a lot of men died. One fist a fire, the other a steel.
If the right one don't get you, then the left one will.
Load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Do 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 do.
My friend Aimee Boulanger serves as Executive Director for the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA. IRMA hosts the Standard for Responsible Mining, the shared definition of best practices in responsible mining, developed over decades by diverse stakeholders. Aimee has worked on mining issues for 25 years, with substantial experience in directly affected communities. In IRMA, her role is to guide an organization fully accountable to multi-stakeholder leadership, creating market value for more responsible business practices, while ensuring credibility and accountability to all stakeholders. She holds a degree in environmental studies and politics from Mount Holyoke College and has served IRMA's leadership since 2011.
So what is responsible mining? And what does it have to do with me, with us, with our climate, and with social justice today? I share my perspectives on this with you all today, the QUF congregation and our friends, with appreciation for this congregation and to be a member of this congregation, and with the principles that it sets us in as we talk about a topic as specific as that, one that many of you may not know much about, one that some of you who know something about it may have very strong feelings about. But as I enter into that, I also want to appreciate this congregation for its raising of our youth, including in this slide my own teenager who serves as a youth leader here, and the wonderful supporting adults we have for our youth leaders, Bo Olgren and Zepp and others. My teenager in this photo is visiting a mine site in Nevada on indigenous lands with me, and when she shared with a 20-something friend recently that her mom works on mining issues, that 20-something friend said, "Oh yes, I'm not for responsible mining. I'm opposed to all mining." And it was a moment where I had one of those, like usually they say, "Hey boomer" to we adults, but I thought, "Hey millennial. Hey millennial, do you know these things that you use, where they come from?" This one has about 41 different mined materials in it. And so as I start to share with you today, I'm going to ground what I say in UU values and in some themes like the way a web of a spider hooks on using major threads, even though internally the whole net of that web is so much more complex. These complicated ideas need to knit to some main themes. And in UU, our principles are the worth and dignity of all people, the justice, equity, and compassion we share with others, acceptance and growth we commit to, a free search for meaning, our conscience and a commitment to the democratic process, supporting a community with peace and liberty and justice, and the respect of that interdependent web of all existence. So as I share with you thoughts on what is responsible mining, I ground in those UU principles and in these main themes on this web of a complicated idea, the fact that in industrialized, wealthier, privileged societies like ours, we do buy and use things. And what we buy and what we use has impacts. And how we increase our awareness of those impacts and we work to reduce harm is part of these values we carry, and how we hold that accountability not only as individuals but also in our governments and our institutions and companies, because we can't do it alone. So backing up now to talk with you about what is mining and what are the impacts of mining today. Modern industrial scale mining is a fundamentally different idea than the pick and shovel of 100 or more years ago, though it's governed by a set of laws which harken back to that time. This photo is from Nevada and gold mining, and it gives you a sense of the broad landscape destruction that comes as we've picked up all the nuggets that sat on the surface, and now we're digging massive holes in the earth and we're putting the waste on top, and as Wendell Berry said, taking mountains and turning them into craters in their inverse. And the impact of this for the materials that many of us use every day sit here not for a few years, not for decades, but for centuries and often thousands of years into the future. This issue isn't just in Nevada, though, or just in South Africa or places far away from home. Just a few weeks ago in the Seattle Times, Dennis Hayes, the first coordinator of the original Earth Day, wrote this opinion piece in the Seattle Times looking at mines in British Columbia that are sending pollution downstream over the Washington state border. And he was condemning not just the pollution, but also reflecting on the fact that this particular mine is a copper mine and that copper is used in renewable energy. And there's an opportunity moment here, but also a call for accountability and responsibility. In a report written by the United Nations Development Program, they reflected that mining has the potential to positively contribute to all 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including gender equity, reducing violence, reducing hunger, education. However, in that same report, the UN also reflected that to date, much of mining's impact has been a negative to all of those Sustainable Development Goals, including gender-based violence, including human rights violations, including social inequality and armed conflict. So the question is, can we create the opportunity that was always there? Can we actually realize the potential to do good with the products that we're using each day? Mining has an impact on communities. In this picture from Papua New Guinea, you see indigenous people right along the edge of an industrial-scale mine and the holes behind them. We know that mining has conflicts with livelihood, like these pictures in Peru, where you see farmers and those dependent on agriculture in direct conflict with industrial-scale extraction, which often brings armed conflict and violence, often within the community itself and with their government leaders. Mining has an impact to air, not just at the mine level, but in the processing and smelters and refiners. And it's got an impact to biodiversity, as in this picture here in Madagascar, where it's impacting millions of kilometers of land in protected areas and key biodiversity zones. And if you turn away from that photo there and look out on the landscape behind, you can see this new extraction coming into these places where our biodiversity, especially in a climate-stressed world, is so fragile. It is responsible for 10% of the world's forest and deforestation from mining. And it is directly affecting our water, both our quality and the quantity of water. This photo from Colorado, from Durango, Colorado, where efforts by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to clean up historic mine pollution released accidentally downstream thousands of gallons of contaminated water from the heavy metals and acidity that had built up over 100 years of mining, including all the way back to pioneer days of mining. And it's estimated in many cases, this photo also from Colorado above the Alamosa Valley, that much of this water contamination will need to be treated in perpetuity, that meaning forever, that sites that might have an operating mine for 10 years, for 20 years, for 40 years, once closed, we may need to manage to protect the water resources in the community downstream forever. I've heard someone in the mining industry say, who holds the forever bond for the costs of reclamation? This picture here on water contamination and looking out to our salt water, to our shoreline, spoken of earlier by Jane. This is in the Philippines with mine waste exiting out into marine ecosystems. So it's an issue of our oceans. If you're concerned with oceans, forests, wildlife, all of these issues tie back to the extraction of the resources we use each day and the people we share this planet with. This bridge here is community people working in Papua New Guinea to cross rivers now of waste that flow off mine site. And again, coming back closer to home again, in Nevada, the waste that piles up behind the extraction that we do is held behind dams that are meant to hold that back. Once the extraction happens, where we've taken the gold or the iron ore or whatever material we're searching, the waste that's left behind. And that stands, just as Wendell Berry says, as a risk to those who live downstream. This isn't an old history. Just in the last 5 years, we've had 3 massive spills of mine waste where tailings dams gave way. This one here in Brazil, and more than 270 lives lost, a clear human rights violation in Brazil, not the poorest country on earth, and one of the wealthiest companies on the world, that is mining companies. That disaster was all the more tragic by the fact that just a couple of years earlier, 19 people died downstream when a mine waste dam gave way, same company, also in Brazil. And again, bringing it back here closer to home in British Columbia, the Mount Poly mine also had its mine waste dam fail just 5 years ago. So this is an issue that's close to our home. It's far from our home, but it's close to the things that we use. And unlike oil and gas, we're not talking about peak mining. We're not talking about the fact that these are materials that we just won't use anymore, despite that 20-something who said something to my daughter. We continue to use these materials, and we use them not only in our laptops and in our phones, in our buildings, in our computers, in our cars, but we also use them because the materials that go into renewable energy themselves often come from mines, whether that be lithium for storage and batteries, or cobalt for copper, even for the iron ore and the aluminum that go into our wind turbines and solar panels. A lot of our transition to more renewable energy still relies on materials, and it's not that oil and gas was bad, and now renewable energy is just as bad. That's not the case. Renewable energy is absolutely essential, and we need to move beyond fossil fuels. But we have to do so with a full life cycle analysis awareness that still our stuff comes from someplace, and it comes with a set of impacts. And can we hold our intentions to do better by a climate-stressed world all the way back to the top of the supply chain? And how? How do we do that? Well, the most important thing we can do is have governments and the laws and regulations that everyone needs to follow in place to protect us and to protect indigenous communities and others who live downstream of these mines, and the future generations that we've spoken to. And we also will continue to need agreements between particular communities and the mines that operate there, those commitments that mines make to respect the communities they're in. And they're going to look different based on which communities are there and what a community asks for as part of its free, prior, and informed consent that especially indigenous communities are expecting. But the broad community support that any community should ask from an industrial neighbor like this. The work that I do sits in this other cog here. It's about an external standard which is voluntary. It will never replace the importance of quality laws and government and the agreements that communities will make, but it's meant as a tool to lever the marketplace that we live in and where we buy our things in to improve. This is my board of directors. It's a picture of their leadership, which is multi-stakeholder. Meaning that it comes from private sector and nonprofit groups, affected communities, but they're here in a press release that was released by BMW, the car company, because they are asking for now many of the same things that mining affected communities are asking for, which is the reduction in environmental and social harm. And they're not alone. This also is an ad that's out by Mercedes, but then Ford here in the US, and with cars more affordable for most of us, similarly asking. It's a moment where the private sector can begin to ask for things that communities are asking for, because the pressures that you all have created out there, expecting better of those people who sell you things, those pressures are being felt and appreciated, and people, the real people who work within many of these companies, are working to press for better. This is that standard that we have, the IRMA Standard for Responsible Mining, which speaks broadly to environmental and social justice. And the idea is that we're not going to trade labor rights against clean water. It's not going to be indigenous rights or reducing climate-emitting gases. It's can we blend together an expectation of more responsible business practices for this climate-stressed world, which brings all of those expectations together and measures a company against all of those things. And when I speak to multi-stakeholder leadership, the idea is we're no longer going to live in a world where business is going to be trusted just because they say to you, trust us. You need only go to the grocery store and pick up the box of your crackers, and you look at how many labels are on the side, and you're left wondering, does that mean that cracker's healthy, or is it the box the cracker's in is recycled? It takes a lot of work to be the informed consumer today. And so it's about creating something which is accountable to what people expect when they see those logos and labels. And so the IRMA standard and its system to push for more responsible mining is the only mining standard in the world which is equally governed by the communities directly affected by mining, with 2 voting seats from mining-affected communities, one from South Africa and one from British Columbia, by NGOs like Human Rights Watch and Earthworks, by the 2 labor unions, which collectively represent most of the mine workers globally, that being the United Steelworkers and Industrial Global Union, by companies like Tiffany & Company and Microsoft, who are purchasing mine materials for the things that they then sell to you and I, and by 2 mining companies as well, who have agreed to sit at the table and work with others. But it's not just the private sector. This is a standard now that's being used by leading global nonprofit, non-government organizations like the World Wildlife Fund, who hold this as the best practice standard for how these materials should be sourced. And like the Sierra Club, one of my first jobs out of college was working for the Sierra Club's Alaska field office some 30 years ago. But just this last year, they passed the very first policy they had on mining in the Sierra Club's 130-year history. And it was holding that there should be recycling and materials retrieval. We should reduce our consumption of the things we don't need and increase the durability of the things that we use, so we're not such a disposable society. But that where we need new mining, it should follow a rigorous standard for best practices in social and environmental responsibility, that being the IRMA standard. And similarly, Human Rights Watch asked for the same, and they asked for it for the sake of protecting the people who live around communities where mining happens that are threatened, environmental rights defenders who are speaking up for their clean water and for the right to oppose projects and the harm that are done. And again, coming back here at home, groups in British Columbia who are using it to measure their own existing laws against and ask for more of their government as well with this kind of impact that can happen on landscapes. So coming back here to our own congregation, our own action, to those points on the web that I mentioned at the beginning, I ask us to think about 4 things. I ask us to think on a personal level about how we reduce our consumption and increase efficiency and recognize that the things we use each day, and we are using things each day in our society here, have impacts, and to understand those impacts, where they come from. The same way we're getting increasingly informed about where does our food come from, where does our water come from, where does our power come from, is understanding where these mined materials come from that we're using. And then to use that point of origin and our understanding there to ask for change, to seek accountability among those who sell us things, to ask for them to change. Because we need to understand, in my 4th point, that while we can ask for a lot as individuals, we will not shop ourselves or educate ourselves out of these issues alone. We need our large institutions and companies to be held accountable to helping us do this change as a collective. The same way racism is systemic, and we need that group change, we need the change in how mining is done to be a whole community-wide and society-wide change. I thank you for being part of that change with us today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have joined you here today. And with that, I'll now ask that you join us for Katy Taylor, who's going to lead us in our closing song, number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth.
For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies, source of all to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight,
Please join us in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. After the service, I hope you will join us for our virtual coffee hour. What you can expect is to be placed in a Zoom room with one of our coffee hour hosts, who will facilitate personal check-ins as well as reflection questions on the sermon topic. I hope to see you there. But first, let us turn our attention to Sheila Harwood, who will now play our postlude, Spiritual Boogie by Gerald Martin.